Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
Thank you, Madam President. It's a unique privilege. Can you guys hear me in the back? Awesome. I'm honored. I am more than honored to actually be here. First time in the state. First time in the city, and the hospitality has been absolutely mind-blowing, and I am tempted to pack up and just move here ever since. So I had a pleasure of going out to dinner yesterday with some of the members, the president, the vice president, and your amazing executive director, and I learned a lot about the club. I learned a bit about the city, and I must say I've traveled to many places where people eat to live, but I've never been to a place where people live to eat. So that was very tempting, very tempting. So I love this, and I was telling Steph, this is like a paradigm shift. Like you feel like you've been living all wrong, but now. So with that, I've been asked to speak about the Rotary Peace Program. It's like a huge program within Rotary Foundation. And I figured the best way to do this is to give you a bit of a background about me, and by extension, frame the problem for which the Peace Fellowship was launched. And then few things about what we've been doing in Phoenix through the advisory. I think it's sort of an interesting post-fellowship project, and it's been very, very successful over the last several years. So if you will, over the next few minutes, think about leaving here today, going home, and at dinner time, you have your families, your grandkids, your friends over dinner, and you're having a great time. Because this city has amazing food. You're having just the most amazing time. And you hear someone at the door, knocking really, really firmly. And you say, well, what's going on? You open the door, the person walks in and says, listen, you've got to pack up and leave immediately. And you're saying, what's happening? He said, this city is going to be attacked. This city is going to be attacked. And you don't have a whole lot of time to think, to plan, just get moving. So you say, okay. So you get the families, and you're thinking, okay, I'm just going. I'll be back in a few days, maybe. You get the kids in the car. You drive to the next town. You get to the next town. You see that people are packing, and they're also moving. Then, okay, so let's keep going. 2-3 days. And before long, you realize you're right on the border of a foreign country. You're saying, okay, for now, we can wait here. We're going to go back. Our home, that's where the kids were born. That's our home. And you wait there a few days, and eventually the whole region disintegrates into civil war, pushing you further and further out into this new place. The year was 1990. I was 5. The Sudanese Civil War came to town, and we took off. First, it looked like we're just going and coming back, but it was all just basically one-way journey. There was no coming back. And I remember my first Christmas in a refugee camp. I was 5 at the time. It rained for 3 days. It's interesting, when I think about it, I can still feel it, and I can still see it. For 3 days, it rained nonstop. And there was no shelter, there's no food, and everyone huddled under a tree, like a mango tree, and waited for the rain to stop. So between 1990, 2007, when I became a US citizen, I went on to live in refugee camps all over Central, East, and the Great Lake region in Africa. It was 17 years that went on. So one of the things I want to highlight, one of the things that I want to highlight is that if you look today at interstate conflict conflict between countries, there's some good news. Those have gone down, right? And that's tremendous news if you think about it, because the UN was created to address this as a fundamental problem. Modern conflict, if you think about it, is essentially civil wars. If you were to kind of list them, most conflicts today are civil wars. Civil wars means a country divided against itself. It's turned inward. And civil wars, I call them, are total wars. They know no child, no woman, and they're incredibly destructive and incredibly difficult to resolve. Right? That's the bad news. The good news is interstate war have dramatically gone down. If you look at expenditure on what we call, well, researchers call violence containment, all the activities that go into dealing with, addressing, preventing violence, conflict, different countries spend different amount of their GDP toward violence containment. On the lower end, about 4% GDP, and these are studies by the Institute for Economics of Peace, which is now partnered with Rotary International. And at the high end, almost 30%. That's the amount that is spent on dealing with the problems of violence and conflict. Another way to look at it is if you look at the top 5 biggest economy in the world, right at the top you have the United States. It's been there for a long time. And then you have China, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom. If you add up the United Kingdom, basically the bottom 3, they're still not equal to 13% of the global GDP. That's how much was spent on dealing with the problems of violence. So I like to look at it because at the end of the day, we got to ask ourselves, what does violence cost me? What does it cost you? What does it cost society? Right? And it turns out violence, this type of violence that are intractable in nature, are very expensive. Very, very expensive and very difficult to resolve. And so Rotary, being an international powerhouse, an international organization that have been involved in various programs, decided, well, peace, global peace, is something that it needed to take on board. But then the question was, how does Rotary go about building peace, regionally, nationally, internationally? What was the best mechanism to go about doing it? It began with what back then was the ambassadorial program, which was a standard 1-year program, and it looked like the Peace Fellowship. But then it morphed into the phased out the ambassadorial fellowship, and then launched the Rotary Peace Fellowship program, which is globally competitive. Hundreds and hundreds of people apply, thousands of people apply, but only a selective few are picked because Rotary is interested in picking the very best among the emerging leaders. These are not people that are well established already, but these are people that have promising potential, and then give them the tools, then send them back into their respective communities and have them work on these subjects. And so Rotary launched and partnered with 5 countries and 1 center. So there are 5 traditional peace centers, 1 in Australia, 1 in the United Kingdom, 1 in Sweden, 1 in North Carolina, that's Duke and Chapel Hill, UNC, and sort of collaboration between 2 universities, the University of Queensland, and then 1 certificate program, that is in Thailand. And then there are distinct centers, so the 5 are traditional masters, 15 months to 24 months, because depending on where you go, there are requirements by each university on what is required to fulfill the requirement for a master's degree. At UQ, it was 15 months. For example, I think in Sweden, it could be up to 2 years. But a certificate is flat. It's 6 months, and I think 3 months of coursework and 3 months of an internship, practical experience. So hence began one of the most successful programs within Rotary that were designed to deal with the problems of conflict. So the specialization is the same. It's peace and conflict resolution, mediation as a focus. And so if you had the pleasure of visiting the Rotary Peace Fellowship website, that picture you're going to find there. We just happened to be, I said, the right time, the right place. The convention was in Sydney at the time. We were in Brisbane, and they were taking a lot of pictures. And one of those pictures became the face of the Peace Fellowship program. So every time I travel, I always like to mention that's me up there. That's me. And when I visit my colleagues, and I always tell them, have you visited the Peace Fellowship website recently? Because that's me up there. So that's the main entrance to the University of Queensland, and on the right side are my colleagues. And they came from different countries, different regions, different sectors. And over the years, I've been looking at the profile of these fellows. And Rotary has been tracking. Obviously, they've mapped out. There's a nice little map on the website where you can see who's where, who's doing what. And it's very interesting because they're pulled from diverse sectors. Literally, they're heads of police, they're lawyers, they're NGO owners, they're academics, everybody. It's incredibly diverse. And these people come from equally diverse regions of the world. And then, if you look at where to go after the fellowship, equally diverse, very broad, right? You can see the percentages up there. Many go into working for NGOs, many go into work for government agencies, and that is a big umbrella term. It really means there are some that are working with the law enforcement, there are some that are working with agencies in DC, there are some that are working with their ministries in their home countries. And then look at that, teaching, advanced degrees, research, law enforcement, the World Bank. Yes, the World Bank. You'll find a lot of fellows there. You go to DC, there are at least 2 or 3 dozen there in New York, and there's even more in DC. So very diverse post-fellowship experience. But then, the more I looked into it, I asked myself, how does Rotary fund its programs? Most of you in here probably familiar with the Rotary causes. That's what Rotary calls it, the different causes. At the top, in terms of expenditure, disease prevention, followed by water and sanitation, economic development, literacy, maternal and child health, and then peace and conflict. It's fascinating. You'll think, when you pay for a peace fellow, you think, okay, this person, quote unquote, is going to be working on peace. But then, when you look at what they do, that person's up there working at the World Bank, they're working with the police department, some are working in academic institutions. So you notice that the Peace Fellowship program, it fuels, it supports, it enables all of the Rotary causes. So I've argued, if we were to increase the budget for the Peace Fellowship, automatically there's a direct correlation between what will happen to all the other areas. Because these people go on to work, regardless what they do, they go back to health, they go back to nursing, they go back to NGOs. And you have people like me who take this, become entrepreneurs. They have organizations, they have businesses, they have nonprofits, and they do a variety of things. You can just say it's all peace, because a lot of the work we do is not necessarily just peace. It may be peace pursued directly, indirectly, I would say, right? Because we support businesses that are involved in various industries. But our hope is that these businesses are going to help societies in which they're involved. So economic development is a great thing. But I was a peace scholar. So in a way, the peace program really enabled all the other Rotary causes. And then I wanted to look at it graphically. And so one of the cases that I've made, and there's a little traction behind this, was to have all the Rotary causes around the wheel, the Rotary wheel. And then to have peace, not as a standalone act, not as a standalone program, but really kind of the center. Because if you think of peace, it's both a process, it's an act, it's a state, it's a condition, and there's a small test to check this out. For anybody that has worked on the polio campaign, the eradication of polio, thank God, in a few years, I think polio will be toast. Right? I tell everybody that. There will be people that are born that do not know what polio is. Because Rotary decided to make the anti-polio campaign a flagship program, and eventually it's going to get rid of polio. And that is tremendous news. And so there are few countries, however, only a handful of them, where polio is still an issue. It's an issue. And so if you look at where these countries are located, I want to argue that lack of peace, the absence of peace, the issues of security happen to be a contributing factor why this thing has gone on way too long. So in order to educate, in order to build wells, in order to work with mothers, in order to do microfinancing, like in Mexico, because Rotary does a lot of microfinancing as well, you assume a degree of stability, some peace. right? You're not going to, the Rotary Foundation is not going to send a Peace Fellow into a country that is on the State Department's website that is marked yellow or red. They're not, because they're saying it's too dangerous. So we all assume that there's some degree of peace that allow Rotarian to go into India, around the world, Nigeria, and immunize children. So my main thing is we need to rethink how we look at peace and to really make it sort of foundational, something that enable and help all the other Rotary causes. And so with that said, one of the things that I've done with my group in Phoenix is that I launched this advisory, and this advisory produced tremendous amount of research, conflict research, security research, but we take this research as a starting point and translate it into advisory services for a variety of agencies or organizations, some NGOs, some multinational, and I'm called often to speak on the risk of a company investing in certain regions. I'll give you one example. Coca-Cola and Hewlett-Packard, they were interested in South Sudan, in East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and they say, well, we're interested in building plants for Coke in South Sudan and making a regional office for HP, and they want to know if it was safe enough. We own and manage over 55 databases. We have consultants, researchers, data collectors in 47 countries. The data comes into Phoenix, we analyze it, we triangulate it, and then we produce assessments for companies that are interested in going to these regions. And I remember telling them, I'll give it 1 month. 1 month before you make your final decision, and if everything is good, go ahead. In 3 weeks, the whole country collapsed. And they said, how did you know? I said, what we've done is we've created a team with analysts and data scientists in Phoenix that look at and triangulate vast data. And then this data then is reanalyzed by consultants on the ground. In other words, it's not someone that is living here, gazing there. It's someone living there. The analysis comes from here. They look at it and they say, okay, yes or no. That's just one side of the type of thing that we do. On the other hand, being a peace scholar myself, I've also been interested in companies that are involved in IT, extractive industries, mining companies especially, because if you look in East Africa and Central Africa, mining is a two-edged sword. On the one hand, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, they are part of a cycle, and this cycle fuels a lot of conflict. But what I was interested in was to work with these companies and make sure that we can design their strategy in working in these sectors and industries and countries that will enable them rather to have this hard footprint, but really to have a softer footprint where their involvement in the region benefits the people there and it adds values to the company. In other words, sustainable business practice there and here. And it's been quite successful. And to back it up, we have this research now that has been rated, ranked, literally since 2015 among the most influential research in the world. And that to me makes me really, really proud because it's evidence-based research that translate into policy and that translate into business practice. And to me, one way to build better peace is to support people that are involved in various practices that cumulatively support. The net effect is greater peace. It's not necessarily just going after peace directly, but going at the different factors and industries that collectively contribute to the well-being and prosperity of a society. As I begin my story in Africa, I want to close also there. I devoted, as I was telling Sherry last night, I told her, now looking back in hindsight, 20, 30 years back, I tell myself, you shouldn't be alive today. I know that. There are many, and everywhere I look, I should not be alive today. I shouldn't be standing here. Because at every opportunity, things could have gone south. But then I told myself, why and how is it possible that you have lived through all of that upheaval? Just every country in East Africa I've been to, there's been a genocide, a civil war, mass violence, you name it. Then I thought, I'm only alive today by the grace of God. And the more I think about it, I realize life, in the larger scheme of things, has a greater purpose. And many, many times, before you get to work on something, sometimes you're taken through that very same thing only to come back and engage with that same thing that you went through, but under very different circumstances. And so I wake up every day and I do a variety of things. I forgot to say, I also teach dance to seniors in Phoenix and youth. It's a whole production. And so it was like, I mean, you're doing so many things. I say, I know, but I enjoy it. I very much enjoy it. I also think that dance is very good for peace. So the more you dance, I think it's very good. So I can't prove it, but I feel it. So yeah. That's my gut feeling tells me it's true. But I said, but I am committed to making sure that by the time we leave this world, that we make it a little better than the one that was handed to us. And every day I wake up, I tell myself, you have to run at the very fullest of your capabilities. And if that means you teach dance one day and the next day you're working with companies, you go, you do it. But you cannot go home and think, I've lived a half life, a half potential, and call it a day. So I wake up every day and I run at the fullest of my ability, at the fullest of my capacity, knowing that someday a kid will not have to be pushed out of his house in the middle of the night just because the country decided to implode. And if we can work collaboratively, collectively, and make sure that this kid doesn't leave his house, is not pushed out, that the person doesn't become homeless, then I think we can call it success and make the world just a little bit better than the one we were given. With that, thank you. And if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Very good. How did you happen to come to the United States?
Very good question. So moving from refugee camp to refugee camp for over a decade, we ended up in Central African Republic, right? A country that is undergoing massive turmoil of its own. And then my mom filed with the United Nations High Commission for Refugee for resettlement, right? The United States had a program where it accepted X number of refugees on an annual basis. Refugee asylum seekers, it's a big umbrella term. But then, back then, I think it was something like 80, 90,000. And then out of that, the South Sudanese were allocated X number of slots. And then there are 6 agencies that are federally mandated to resettle these refugees. Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, IRC, International Rescue Committees. There are about 6 of them. And then so we came through IRC. And once her application was approved, the basic said, okay, here are a list of states where you can go. There are a few states that, because each state has to say, yes, we want to resettle refugees. And Arizona was one of the states, Oklahoma, Nebraska. And mom looked at it and she said, New York. She said, no, it's too cold. Boston, no way. But then they said, Phoenix is dry and hot. She says, boom, right there. And to this day, mom is very convinced that the hot weather, the hot summer, is very good for her. And so she's never complained about the weather. But when it gets very cold, mom gets very, very cranky. It's just like so no. And so,
Are those same programs still in place today to bring refugees?
yes, but I think the number of refugee has been dramatically cut. And I think it's been capped at, if I'm correct, 30,000. And so it's fascinating because it's one of the most successful vetting processes in the world. People don't realize, like, to be resettled as a refugee in the United States, you undergo no less than 24 months of vetting. And now, with the advent of the Department of Homeland Security, all the federal agencies that are involved screen you. So it's not just some random person that is allowed to come here. The refugee is somebody that has been thoroughly vetted and resettled. And you can compare that to Europe, for example, which also has a similar problem. And there, because there are multiple countries with different vetting systems and mechanisms, they don't have what the United States has. And so I always tell people it's not that anybody just hops on the plane and shows up here. There's a long process, protracted process of who they allow to resettle in the United States. And then I became a citizen in 2007, and I remember, like, I went home and wrote about it because I went to high school here, and I went to Arizona State after high school. And I sat in class with people that, for whatever reason, basically just they were born and they were. And I kept telling myself, it's very interesting because there was a process, a long process, year-long process, right? Took 5 years, right? Of becoming an American. right? You're not born American, that you had to become American. You had to fulfill certain requirement to become a U.S. citizen. And that's something that I have always been very, very thankful for, that it allowed me to appreciate my citizenship a lot more. That, yes.
Thank you for your information. It was very moving. I want to know, who do you look towards for inspiration? What inspires you?
Hands down, my mom. And I once wrote that what was given to my mom was so much, what was expected from her so much, but what was given to her so little, right? So mom was a single mother that straddled with the family there, here, and to this day, mom works around the clock to make sure that her family is taken care of. And metaphorically speaking, I think mom gave her whole life so that we went beyond where she was. And that kind of sacrifice, I think, it's very rare. That one person, the expectation from one person can be so astronomical. All right, that backbreaking, that she has worked nonstop. And she said, go to school, work hard, and do more, be better than where I am. And so for me, hands down, my mom has always been sort of a model for the sacrifice she made for me and my siblings.
What I took away from your talk is you would love to see Rotary increase their funding for the sixth one over there, the peace deal. How do we help influence that with our little Rotary club here? Do we got to work through our esteemed district governor? I use the term loosely, but are there better ways to try to influence Rotary to increase their funding in this area?
You know, it's fascinating because the interesting about Rotary is that without the clubs, there is no Rotary. Think about it. It's not like the Rotary can exist outside of the club. In fact, the most important unit within Rotary, I think, is the club. And what the club does at the front end, whether it's through community engagement or it's sponsoring fellowship or it's the exchange program with high school students, it's what makes Rotary so special. And I think Rotary as a group is also made up of very influential people. I've had the pleasure of meeting some of these people, and here today, you have a lot of sway within Rotary. I know because in Phoenix, clubs that contribute more to Rotary, when they speak, the way my sponsoring club did, when they called the foundation and said, hold it, they listened. In other words, you can shape Rotary, right? It gets done all the time. And you can learn a bit about the fellowship program. And I've given talks around Arizona to potential Arts Club Society members. And there are people that have earmarked funding that go in specifically to the Rotary Peace Program. So there are various ways to go about it, but I think as a club, if you have a policy and you have the support, Rotary is going to listen. Because this is something that Rotary has been trying, and they are going to expand the program, especially the certificate program. I think there's a 10-year plan, so Rotary is going to do what it's always done, which is do a study to see how can it expand the certificate program because it's also very successful, and then decide on where, right? Because the host of a Rotary Center is a prestigious thing. And countries, literally, it's like the Olympics, I think. Hosting the Olympics is a big deal. Same thing with hosting a Rotary Center. Because countries have to come forward and say, we want to be the center. And I think, someone told me, Asia wants to have its own center. And then now there's a competition of where the center is going to be built. So I see this, I hear it, and it's exciting. Because what it is basically Rotary is delegating to the regions greater autonomy in addressing some of the issues that require rapid response.
Support provided by Walters Thomas Collins LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.